Hello everybody and welcome to Druttercup's Book Club on this bleeding cold Monday evening. Apologies for the delay. OBS decided it wanted to update and then it decided it wanted to fall off a cliff, leaving me very, very confused. So hopefully this is now all sorted and it's going out on both Twitch and YouTube, purely for those who wish to watch rather than interact. So, hello Chrono, hello Niblik, hello Hiram. Please go and eat something, Hiram. Your sushi awaits. Hello Kate B. Some news this evening. I have succeeded, or I say I have succeeded, you lot have succeeded, in passing my Ko-fi goal. So I'm going to be backing The Sinking City 2 at the deluxe level, which means DLC is a go. So the glorp is very real, so expect me to be running screaming when that comes out on release. Looks good so far is all I'm going to say. So thanks immensely, because without people donating, I would not, and supporting me, I would not have been able to go for, you know, the more efficient way of buying it, which is the deluxe. Because of course DLCs are always more expensive down the line. So thank you hugely for that, and I will be saying thank you again when my game stream is up later, which will be Sherlock Holmes Chapter 1, because of course it is, because it's a Monday. So, so on Druttercup Book Club this week, we are on John Charrington's Wedding, which is by E. Nesbitt, better known as a children's author, almost perpetually adapted by the BBC in the 70s and 80s. Such wonderful items as 5 Children in It, about something creepy that grants wishes living in a sandpit, The Phoenix and the Carpet, which strikes me as a fire hazard, but hey. And generally speaking, that's what she's known for. She's known for her children's stories. What she is also, I'm not going to say guilty of, she also was quite prolific writing horror and ghost stories. The Phoenix in the Carpet, which is a weird one. I'm going to be honest, it's a peculiar one. It's one I really like. I'm going to have to turn that notification off for Techie because, yeah, okay. Oh, Vila Gatson, thank you so much. Yay. So yes, somebody who wrote nice, if stories, kid stories with a bite to them. Also wrote horror and ghost stories. So, you know, get you someone who can do everything. But I love that there's the impression of Nesbitt as this lovely little old lady, when of course A, nobody's born a little old lady, and B, she was, as you know, she was deeply intelligent. She was a strong representative of the Fabian Society, and was heavily involved in the labour movement. So quite politically active. So even though a lot of her stories, especially her kids' ones, were centred around sort of old country houses, that kind of thing, being rich was not necessarily a guarantee of a good outcome, shall we say. You feel phoenixes and carpets don't mix well. Yep. It's a very good story, though. Very good book. And yeah, there were some... It's one that's perennially adapted and readapted, as is Five Children in It. But you think Beatrix Potter gets painted the same way, and she was like a professional scientific illustrator. Yeah, absolutely, which really shows through in the illustrations for her books. For all that they're fantasy anthropomorphic versions of creatures for the most part, they are also incredibly detailed. Okay, so this is one of Nesbit's stories from her collection Grim Tales, and it is John Charrington's Wedding. Indeed, Niblick, the illustrations are beautiful. I used to have a collection of mugs when I was a very small drut, with Beatrix Potter illustrations on, and I used to really like those. They were lovely. Okay. If you're sitting comfortably and the sound's okay for everybody, she says optimistically. John Charrington's Wedding. No one ever thought that May Forster would marry John Charrington, but he thought differently, and things which John Charrington intended had a queer way of coming to pass. He asked her to marry him before he went up to Oxford. She laughed and refused him. He asked her again next time he came home. Again she laughed, tossed her dainty blonde head, and again refused. A third time he asked her. She said it was becoming a confirmed bad habit, and laughed at him more than ever. John was not the only man who wanted to marry her. She was the belle of our village coterie, and we were all in love with her more or less. It was a sort of fashion, like heliotrope ties or Inverness capes. Therefore we were as much annoyed as surprised when John Charrington walked into our little local club. We held it in a loft over the Saddlers, I remember, and invited us all to his wedding. Your wedding? You don't mean it. Who's the happy fair? When's it to be? John Charrington filled his pipe and lighted it before he replied, and then he said, I'm sorry to deprive you fellows of your only joke, but Miss Forster and I are to be married in September. You don't mean it. He's got the mitten again and it's turned his head. No, I said, rising. I see it's true. Lend me a pistol, someone, or a first-class fare to the other end of nowhere. Charrington has bewitched the only pretty girl in our 20-mile radius. Was it mesmerism or a love potion, Jack? Neither, sir, but a gift you'll never have, perseverance, and the best luck a man ever had in this world. There was something in his voice that silenced me, and all chaff of the other fellows failed to draw him further. The queer thing about it was that when we congratulated Miss Forster, she blushed and smiled and dimpled, for all the world as though she were in love with him, and had been in love with him all the time. Upon my word, I think she had. Women are strange creatures. We were all asked to the wedding. In Brixham, everyone who was anybody knew everybody else who was anyone. My sisters were, I truly believe, more interested in the trousseau than the bride herself, and I was to be best man. The coming marriage was much canvassed at afternoon tea tables, and at our little club over the Saddlers, and the question was always asked, does she care for him? I think she said no 3 times and then yes on the 4th. At least he gave her months between proposals, rather than bombarding her. But, yes, he gave her time between, at least. I still think that's a little bit pushy, but I used to ask that question myself in the early days of their engagement, but after a certain evening in August I never asked it again. I was coming home from the club through the churchyard. Our church is on a time-grown hill, and the turf about it so thick and soft that one's footsteps are noiseless. Exactly, Hiram. A man who can make her laugh, if nothing else. I made no sound as I vaulted the low, lichened wall and threaded my way between the tombstones. It was at the same instant that I heard John Charrington's voice and saw her. May was sitting on a low, flat gravestone, her face turned towards the full splendour of the western sun. Its expression ended at once and forever any question of love for him. It was transfigured to a beauty I should not have believed possible, even to that beautiful little face. John lay at her feet, and it was his voice that broke the stillness of the golden August evening. My dear, I believe I should come back from the dead if you wanted me." I coughed at once to indicate my presence, and passed on into the shadow, fully enlightened. The wedding was to be early in September. 2 days before, I had to run up to town on business. The train was late, of course, for we were on the Southeastern. Some things never change. And as I stood grumbling with my watch in my hand, whom should I see but John Charrington and May Forster? They were walking up and down the unfrequented end of the platform, arm in arm, looking into each other's eyes, careless of the sympathetic interest of the porters. Kate B, don't say things like that. Yeah, there's a little bit of a hostage to fortune, isn't it? I refer everybody also to Conan. Of course, I knew better than to hesitate a moment before burying myself in the booking office, and it was not till the train drew up at the platform that I obtrusively passed the pair with my Gladstone, and took the corner in a first-class smoking carriage. I did this with as good an air of not seeing them as I could assume. I pride myself on my discretion, but if John were travelling alone, I wanted his company. I had it. "Hello, old man," came his cheery voice as he swung his bag into my carriage. "Here's luck. I was expecting a dull journey." Don't say things like that, especially in the graveyard. You don't put that into the universe. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that makes fates giggle. "Where are you off to?" I asked, discretion still bidding me turn my eyes away, though I saw without looking that hers were red-rimmed. "To old Brambridge's," he answered, shutting the door and leaning out for a last word with his sweetheart. "Oh, I wish you wouldn't go, John," she was saying in a low, earnest voice. "I feel certain something will happen." "You think I should let anything happen to keep me, and the day after tomorrow our wedding day?" "Don't go," she answered with a pleading intensity which would have sent my Gladstone onto the platform and me after it. But she wasn't speaking to me. John Charrington was made differently. He rarely changed his opinions, never his resolutions. He only stroked the little ungloved hands that lay on the carriage door. "I must, May. The old boy's been awfully good to me, and now he's dying I must go and see him, but I shall come home in time for—" The rest of the parting was lost in the whisper and in the rattling lurch of the starting train. "You're sure to come?" she spoke as the train moved. "Nothing shall keep me," he answered, and we steamed out. It's a monkey's paw situation. You get what you want, but in the worst way. Yep. After he'd seen the last of the little figure on the platform, he leaned back in his corner and kept silence for a minute. When he spoke, it was to explain to me that his godfather, whose heir he was, lay dying at Peasmarsh Place, some 50 miles away, and had sent for John, and John had felt bound to go. "I shall surely be back tomorrow," he said, "or if not, the day after, in heaps of time. Thank heavens, one hasn't to get up in the middle of the night to get married nowadays." Oh dear. Chat seems you seem like he's just showed pictures of his fiancée with 3 days to retirement, and he's picked out a cottage with a white picket fence, possibly a puppy. You seem to think he's doomed. "And suppose Mr. Brambridge dies?" "Alive or dead, I mean to be married on Thursday," John answered, lighting a cigar and unfolding the Times. At Peasmarsh Station we said goodbye, and he got out, and I saw him ride off. I went on to London, where I stayed the night. When I got home the next afternoon, a very wet one, by the way, my sister greeted me with, "Where's Mr. Charrington?" "Goodness knows," I answered testily. "Every man since Cain has resented that kind of question." "I thought you might have heard from him," she went on, "as you're to give him away tomorrow." "Isn't he back?" I asked, for I had confidently expected to find him at home. "No, Geoffrey." My sister Fanny always had a way of jumping to conclusions, especially such conclusions as were least favourable to her fellow creatures. "He has not returned, and what's more, you may depend upon it he won't. You mark my words, there'll be no wedding tomorrow." My sister Fanny has a power of annoying me which no other human being possesses. As someone who has a sister, growing up, yep, can back that one up. "You mark my words," I retorted with asperity. "You had better give up making such a thundering idiot of yourself. There'll be more wedding tomorrow than ever you'll take the first part in." A prophecy which, by the way, came true. But though I could snarl confidently to my sister, I did not feel so comfortable when, late that night, I, standing on the doorstep of John's house, heard that he had not returned. I went home gloomily through the rain. Next morning brought a brilliant blue sky, gold sun, and all such softness of air and beauty of cloud as go to make up a perfect day. I woke with a vague feeling of having gone to bed anxious, and of being rather averse to facing that anxiety in the light of full wakefulness. You don't know how this ends, but you feel the women are right in their intuitions. Yeah, he's having a go at his system, basically saying that there'll be more of a wedding than she'll ever have. It's your standard sibling bickering, isn't it? It's the way it works. You're awful to your siblings. If anyone else is awful to your siblings, then daggers drawn. That's because you reckon that's because they're sensible and they realise that this is not going to end well. I mean, the sister's opinion, Fanny's opinion, is clearly that John Charrington's run off and that he's not going to come back. So she's clearly, I think we can read between the lines there, that she's decided that he's not intending to marry her. Which I think kind of negates the whole has proposed to her multiple times over several years. So it seems a bit unlikely he would push that hard and then give up and go, "Yeah, you know, I won't bother." Sorry, excuse me one moment. I've just had an email and I need to have a brief breakdown. Excuse me. Sorry about this. Hi. Sorry about that. Yeah. No, it's, you hope everything's okay. Yeah, everything is more than okay. I've just had an email from somebody regarding some work, and it is not somebody I ever thought would email me. So I had a mild nervous breakdown. But it is all good. It's absolutely... No, it's fine. It's brilliant. I'm just... some things you just don't expect to have pop up in your inbox, let's put it that way. Ah, okay. Right. Okay, sorry. Right, I need a sec. Give me a moment. Okay. Right. Go back. Go there. Sorry, that totally threw me off my stride. Yeah, no, it is a very good breakdown. It's something I've been hoping for quite a long time. But not the person I was expecting to hear from about, if you see what I mean. So I am moderately discombobulated, that's all. It's kind of a what, who, why, what, when. Which is silly because there's no information about it, it's just a yes, no. But it is something really good, yeah. I will obviously be editing this mild wibble out, but yeah. As I said, it's something I had hoped about. Was not something I had realised was likely to happen any time in the foreseeable. And nor was I expecting who was the project lead. So I'm just a bit blah. Okay, this is fine. I wish someone had warned me, but okay. Right. Of all the times to get something really good, and I'm on stream when it happens. Yay. So, looking like a complete idiot there. Or it's sounding like it anyway. Yep, okay, I will be editing this bit out for the YouTube video. Okay. This is fine. All good. I got some good news, Hiram. I got some very good news I have been waiting for quite a while. Or waiting to hear about for quite a while. No specifics, but it is a good thing.com. You know? Yeah, cheers for that, guys. Okay, so returning to the text. Yeah, basically, the sister, who is clearly, I think, similar enough to the narrator that I think there's a reason that they get up each other's noses. Because going back to the scene in the club when John Charrington announces that he's finally got engaged, everybody else is kind of what? And the narrator's like, right, no, book me a ticket to the end of the world, that's it, my life's over. Not in a serious way, but you get the feeling that he's quite sarcastic and probably one of those people who, with his friends and family, is quite openly sarky, snarky. Delete as applicable. Nesbitt does seem to specialise in writing sibling issues and relationships. Yeah, absolutely. Her children's books quite often featured groups of kids, and she absolutely nailed the sibling dynamic there of people getting snotty with each other but pulling together when it came to it. And that kind of thing, it's nice to see, and also without losing the characterizations. A problem I always felt I had with the various the famous Five and Secret Seven of Enid Blyton was, to a certain extent, the kids kind of blurred into each other. You felt that for the most part any of the children could have delivered any of the lines, whereas when you read an E. Nesbitt, they all have their own personalities, if that makes sense. Right. Right. So he's woken up on the morning of what should be the wedding. And the previous night, John Charrington had not returned from the 50-mile away godfather's house. But with my shaving water came a note from John, which relieved my mind and sent me up to the Forsters with a light heart. May was in the garden. I saw her blue gown through the hollyhocks as the lodge gates swung to behind me. So I did not go up to the house, but turned aside down the turfed path. "He's written to you too," she said, without preliminary greeting, when I reached her side. "Yes, I'm to meet him at the station at 3 and come straight on to the church." Clearly there is a relationship there. It's not that May is this unattainable creature that nobody in town really knew except to look at and go, "Oh, she's beautiful." It's clear that she knows, that these are people all roughly the same age, quite possibly went to school at the same schools, at least for primary school. It's small village rather than big city. So these are people of, she's not just a figure passing through the world, she exists there, It's likely they were in each other's classes, they went to church together, they will know each other. She's not some stranger from out of town or anything. Hasn't just appeared. "He's written to you too," she said, without preliminary greeting, when I reached her side. "Yes, I'm to meet him at the station at 3 and come straight on to the church." Her face looked pale, but there was a brightness in her eyes and a tender quiver about the mouth that spoke of renewed happiness. "Mr. Brambridge begged him so to stay on another night. He had not the heart to refuse," she went on. "He's so kind, but I wish he hadn't stayed." I was at the station at 2:30. I felt rather annoyed with John. It seemed a sort of slight to the beautiful girl who loved him that he should come, as it were, out of breath, and with the dust of travel upon him, to take her hand, which some of us would have given the best years of our lives to take. But when the 3 o'clock train glided in and glided out again, having brought no passengers to our little station, I was more than annoyed. There was no other train for 35 minutes. I calculated that with much hurry we might just get to the church in time for the ceremony. But oh, what a fool to miss that first train. What other man could have done it? That 35 minutes seemed a year, as I wandered around the station, reading the advertisements and the timetables and the company's bylaws, and getting more and more angry with John Charrington. This confidence in his own power of getting everything he wanted the minute he wanted it was leading him too far. I hate waiting. Everyone does, but I believe I hate it more than anyone else. The 3:35 was late, of course. I ground my pipe between my teeth and stamped with impatience as I watched the signals. Click, the signal went down. 5 minutes later, I flung myself into the carriage that I had bought for John. "Drive to the church," I said as someone shut the door. "Mr. Charrington hasn't come by this train." Anxiety now replaced anger. What had become of the man? Could he have been taken suddenly ill? I had never known him have a day's illness in his life, and even so he might have telegraphed. Some awful accident must have happened to him. The thought that he had played her false never, no, not for a moment, entered my head. He hates waiting more than anyone else. Try me, mate. Yeah. Oh, I think you're a very unusual person if you've not done that. I have read every single piece of writing in this station, airport, waiting room, dentist surgery, and you've hit that point where you've read every single piece of literature that there is, including the notices on what to do in case of a fire, and you look up and it's been like 5 minutes. I think we've all been there. Something terrible had happened to him, and on me lay the task of telling his bride. I almost wished the carriage would upset and break my head so that someone else might tell her, not I, who... But that's nothing to do with this story. Once you're there, you're okay, but waiting before you go to the thing is genuinely painful and anxiety-inducing. Yeah, wait state is... I don't know if it's an autism thing, but it is an ADHD thing. It's why 4:30 in the afternoon is the worst possible time for an appointment, because that means for the rest of the day up until then you can do nothing. You are locked in place, just in case you miss it. It was 5 minutes to 4 as we drew up at the churchyard gate. A double row of eager onlookers lined the path from lich gate to porch. I sprang from the carriage and passed up between them. Our gardener had a good front place near the door. I stopped. "Are they waiting still, Biles?" I asked, simply to gain time, for of course I knew they were by the waiting crowd's attentive attitude. "Waiting, sir? No, sir. Why, it must be over by now." "Over? Then Mr. Charrington's come?" "To the minute, sir. Must have missed you somehow, and I say, sir," lowering his voice, "I never see Mr. John the least bit so before, but in my opinion he's been drinking pretty free. His clothes was all dusty and his face like a sheet. I tell you I didn't like the looks of him at all, and folks inside are saying all sorts of things. You'll see something's gone very wrong with Mr. John, and he's tried liquor. He looked like a ghost, and in he went with his eyes straight before him, with never a look or a word for none of us. Him that was always such a gentleman. I don't know why this guy, who is presumably in Kent, suddenly sounds like he comes from the West Country. Sorry about that. For a while you had a job that started at 4 p.m. and you liked the job, but you couldn't do anything else all day. Yeah, absolutely. My last job started at 7 a.m. I hated getting up at that time, but a couple of times when I had to cover someone in the afternoon, that was worse, because you're kicking around all day and clock watching. It's a nightmare. It is a neurodivergent thing, yeah. I had never heard Biles make so long a speech. The crowd in the churchyard were talking in whispers and getting ready rice and slippers to throw at the bride and bridegroom. These are tokens of of good wishes. These are not abuse. By the way, just in case you had concerns. The rice is standard. And to a certain extent is still used, although churches hate it because they have to clean up. Slippers, less so. That one has gone by the by. If nothing else, slippers are expensive. The ringers were ready with their hands on the ropes to ring out the merry peal as the bride and bridegroom should come out. A murmur from the church announced them. Out they came. Biles was right. John Charrington did not look himself. There was dust on his coat. His hair was disarranged. He seemed to have been in some row, for there was a black mark above his eyebrow. He was deathly pale, but his pallor was not greater than that of the bride, who might have been carved in ivory. Dress, veil, orange blossoms, face and all. As they passed out, the ringers stooped. There were 6 of them. And then, on the ears expecting the gay wedding peal, came the slow tolling of the passing bell. A thrill of horror at so foolish a jest from the ringers passed through us all, but the ringers themselves dropped the ropes and fled like rabbits out into the sunlight. The bride shuddered, and grey shadows came about her mouth, but the bridegroom led her on down the path where people stood with handfuls of rice. But the handfuls were never thrown, and the wedding bells never rang. In vain the ringers were urged to remedy their mistake. They protested with many whispered expletives that they would see themselves further first. Deathly pale or just dead. Who knows? The passing bell, of course, being played at church funerals. It's the tolling of the funeral bell. And seeing themselves further is a euphemism for they'd see themselves dead first. So the bell ringers refused to ring the wedding bells. In a hush like the hush in the chamber of death, the bridal pair passed into their carriage and its door slammed behind them. Then the tongues were loosed. A babel of anger, wonder, conjecture from the guests and spectators. "If I'd seen his condition, sir," said old Forster to me as we drove off, "I would have stretched him on the floor of the church, sir. By heaven I would, before I'd have let him marry my daughter." Then he put his head out of the window. "Drive like hell," he cried to the coachman. "Don't spare the horses." He was obeyed. We passed the bride's carriage. I forbore to look at it, and old Forster turned his head away and swore. We reached home before it. We stood in the hall doorway, in the blazing afternoon sun, and in about half a minute we heard wheels crunching the gravel. When the carriage stopped in front of the steps, old Forster and I ran down. Great heavens, the carriage is empty, and yet... I had the door open in a minute, and this is what I saw. No sign of John Charrington and of May, his wife. Only a huddled heap of white satin lying half on the floor of the carriage and half on the seat. "I drove straight here, sir," said the coachman as the bride's father lifted her out. "And I'll swear no one got out of the carriage." We carried her into the house in her bridal dress and drew back her veil. I saw her face. Shall I ever forget it? White and drawn with agony and horror, bearing such a look of terror as I have never seen since, except in dreams. And her hair, her radiant blonde hair, I tell you it was white like snow. As we stood, her father and I, half mad with the horror and mystery of it, a boy came up the avenue, a telegraph boy. They brought the orange envelope to me. I tore it open. "Mr. Charrington was thrown from the dog-cart on his way to the station at 1:30, killed on the spot. And he was married to May Forster in our parish church at 3:30 in presence of half the parish. I shall be married dead or alive." What had passed in that carriage on the homeward drive? No one knows. No one will ever know. Oh, May, oh, my dear. Before a week was over, they laid her beside her husband in our little churchyard on the time-covered hill, the churchyard where they had kept their love trysts. Thus was accomplished John Charrington's wedding. It's a lovely little ghost story. It uses a lot of very familiar tropes. I apologise. Yes, that is jolly, isn't it? It's your classic, but that house burned down 6 years ago. But of course, when Nesbit was writing, she's one of those who really codified those tropes, and nailed them into a form that we're all familiar with now. But yes, do be careful when making vows that you haven't done it in a graveyard and that it relates to death. And yeah, that was perhaps foolishness on his part. But you've got to admit, he had, as he said, the power of tenacity. Not even death was going to stop him showing up. You wonder if people found it predictable back then. Let me check when this was actually written, because I can't remember the publication date. It was 1891. For the Temple Bar magazine. It is one of your classic folk stories of, you know, a young lover returning from death to claim his bride. There are versions where the death happens because they've gone to war. Fisherman is a standard one. You know, somebody in a shipwreck. Not letting mere death keep them away from their appointment. So yeah, it's not. Yeah, exactly. Such jobs were really dangerous. So it's not, even then, it was not an original twist, but it's well written, and the characterization's extremely good. And as I said, it kind of helped codify that trope from folklore into sort of really official literature, I suppose. She, not just her, obviously, but she was part of those formalising and let's say legitimising folktales, if that makes sense. This isn't in my humble opinion. Obviously, other people are more than able to give their own. So, there is a version of this which was done as a straight book reading. I've heard it a couple of times. One is by the chap who does the stage play The Book of Darkness and Light, who has an extremely good performing manner. He does storytelling very, very well. The other one was one of Christopher Lee's Fireside Tales back in 2004, where Christopher Lee did a series of ghost stories that December for Christmas. And I think that one, I think at least the reading on radio, I think is available on YouTube. And of course, Christopher Lee, are you going to argue with that voice? You like it so much foreshadowing when you know something will happen, but not what exactly. Kind of like May, who knew something was going to happen, but yeah, the details were not nailed down. There's the definite impression that his ghost, well, we're hoping it was his ghost. It's either that or, you know, an actual undead made it back from the crash. You'll obviously, Christopher Lee was usually described as what an actor, how prestigious, how noble, such class, and people forget he got there because he played in every B movie and spoof he could find. Kinda. Christopher Lee was ridiculous. He's one of those who was the actor's actor, but also he was very aware that acting was his career. One thing he was never precious about it. He didn't accept every script he was sent, I gather, but he accepted most of them. And a quote from him from a documentary a while ago, well, just after his death actually, was he could been in bad films, but that was no reason to be bad in it. So no matter how duff the production, he always brought his A game and he was always class. It's like David Warner, who had much the same attitude, appeared in everything from absolute art house right down to complete and utter nonsense. But he never really performed with a nod and a wink to the camera. It wasn't an, oh yes, I know this is crap. He always turned up and gave it his all. He always, always tried and always gave good value. This is why I don't think either of them were ever out of work. And I love that attitude. I really have a lot of time for people with that attitude in whatever they're doing. Your heart goes rather to Sir Ian McKellen. That's perfectly fair. Perfectly reasonable. No argument there. I mean, Christopher Lee, of course, had a life that was... If you fictionalised it, you'd just be going, no, don't be daft. And I maintain that's why nobody's done a proper biopic of him. Just because what would you focus on? Would you focus on the special forces? Would you focus on his acting career? Would you focus on the historical stuff he did? The rock opera, It's where would you go? And I still adore what he said as regards to Peter Jackson on the imagine what it feels like, imagine what it sounds like when you stab someone in the back, and he just said, I don't have to imagine, and it's okay. Which is how his character in Lord of the Rings died a specific way when he was supposed to die differently. He was supposed to sort of die screaming after having been stabbed, and Christopher Lee just went, no, that's not right. Because of course, he was basically in British Special Forces in World War II. So it's always an interesting one. He was a fascinating guy. Yeah, I mean, I gather he was very nice about it, but that was just a no. And I think Peter Jackson just bowed to his superior knowledge at that point and just went, okay, off you go. But yes, he did the series of ghost stories. Did several, in fact, but this story specifically, was in the 2004. So, what did people think of that? Anything else you would like to ask, say, comment? Because if not, then because I started late, I'm not going to do a second story today. But next week, I'm going to do an Algernon Blackwood story. Nothing to add, but it was yummy, and you would respond positively to more from this author. I will seek out some more from of E. Nesbit then. Possibly, I will have a look at the length of the books. But I may look at one of her actual kids' books, if people would be interested in that. Possibly The Phoenix and the Carpet, since Five Children in It seems to have had at least 3 adaptations. But just as a alternative. Even her kids' books are not childish, if that makes sense. So, yes, next week is going to be an Algernon Blackwood story, The Kit Bag, where a lawyer going away for holiday after a difficult case has some difficulty packing, is all I'm gonna say. It's an extremely creepy little ghost story, and it's rather fun. Algernon Blackwood being one of those who inspired Lovecraft. So this is not a cosmic horror. This is a haunted bag. I love bottle shows and that sort of equivalent, and that brings it right down to the smallest possible area. So that's what we'll be doing next week. I'm going to take a 10-15 minute break and just chase up some work stuff, and then I will be back on with Sherlock Holmes chapter 1, and we can get some of that in. So I hope to see some of you there, and for the rest of you, I shall hope to see you next week. Bye bye.